In organizational psychology, there is a long-held assumption. Hiring employees with a high desire to serve the public naturally yields better performance and lower turnover. This creates a linear model of motivation. The working theory is that an employee's internal drive dictates their outward job satisfaction. You plot public service motivation on the x-axis and positive outcomes on the y-axis. The line slopes precisely upward. But recent large-scale empirical data proves this linear model is a severe oversimplification. When tested across actual workplaces, that straight line fractures. Human behavior doesn't map cleanly to two dimensions. We have to account for a third variable, the environmental context. This is the interactionist perspective. An individual's motivation functions in direct relation to their environment. High public service motivation is not a static engine that guarantees success. It acts as a highly sensitive lens that dictates exactly how an employee interprets and experiences reality. A 2026 systematic review by Wisanapong Potipiroon synthesized data from over 2 decades of global research to map exactly how this motivation responds to environmental friction. The researchers used a rigorous PRISMA methodology to filter the results down to 153 studies, specifically examining public service motivation as a moderator, the factor that dictates the strength and direction of other organizational effects. The data pool spanned public administrations in China, Denmark, the US, and Vietnam, proving this interactionist model is a globally validated mathematical framework for understanding organizational behavior. The primary finding is clear. An employee's baseline motivation alters both the strength and the direction of how they react to other variables, like red tape or leadership in a workplace. Treating an employee's drive as a standalone metric without calculating how it will react to their specific environment results in flawed organizational design. We can map these reactions into specific statistical patterns. The first, and arguably most counterintuitive model, is the synergistic interaction. This graph maps citizen incivility on the x-axis against an employee's emotional exhaustion on the y-axis. For an employee with low public service motivation, encountering a hostile public is unpleasant, but their emotional exhaustion remains relatively flat. They aren't deeply invested, so the incivility bounces off. But look at an employee with high motivation. Facing the exact same hostility, their emotional exhaustion curves sharply upward. The underlying psychology here is clear. Highly motivated employees expect their sacrifices for the public to be meaningful. Because they care so much, friction and incivility hurt them exponentially more. Their deep psychological investment essentially makes them structurally rigid. When exposed to sudden weight or stress, they don't bend, they fracture, leading to accelerated burnout. In this model, high motivation actively weaponizes a toxic work environment against the employee's own mental health. Conversely, there is another statistical pattern, known as the buffering effect, where high motivation weakens a negative behavioral outcome. To see this, we shift our y-axis from internal emotional exhaustion to outward action, specifically counterproductive work behavior. When an unmotivated employee encounters a hostile citizen, the data shows they are highly likely to retaliate or withdraw their effort. Their negative behavior spikes. But the highly motivated employee absorbs that hostility. Buffered by their baseline empathy and commitment to public service, their negative behavior stays stubbornly flat, even as incivility rises. Their motivation acts as an operational shield for the organization's reputation. But as we saw in the previous graph, the employee is still absorbing all of that psychological damage internally. The final 2 geometric patterns are antagonistic and crossover effects. These occur when high motivation either neutralizes an expected outcome entirely or completely reverses it. These reversals happen because the values inherent in public service are often plural and conflicting. A policy might prioritize strict efficiency, while an employee prioritizes social equity. This dynamic introduces the central mechanism determining how an employee reacts: value congruence. An individual's specific motivational profile dictates how they rank competing values when faced with complex trade-offs. If an organization implements a policy that signals a misalignment with the employee's core values, that highly motivated worker won't just be neutral. They may actively resist or disengage. This proves why rolling out identical policies across a massive workforce yields contradictory results. Success depends entirely on the internal value alignment of the staff. The 2026 review also isolated two critical, largely under-theorized phenomena that explain exactly why motivation fails. The first is expectancy sensitivity. Highly motivated individuals enter their roles with elevated expectations regarding institutional ethics, leadership, and their ability to make an impact. When those expectations are violated by suffocating red tape or corrupt organizational politics, the resulting drop in morale isn't proportional. While an unmotivated employee's morale dips slightly, the highly motivated employee's morale drops drastically into negative territory. Because their initial expectations were so high, the violation triggers a severe psychological contract breach. The second phenomenon is saturation. This applies the economic concept of diminishing marginal returns directly to human motivation. This curve plots contextual enhancements against actual performance. If you add more resources or financial incentives to an environment where the employees are already highly motivated, you reach an asymptote. The performance output quickly flattens out, yielding zero additional returns. This leaves organizational leaders with a difficult paradox. Highly motivated employees are far more fragile when conditions are bad, and less responsive to standard incentives when conditions are good. Synthesizing these models allows us to map the ultimate organizational failure state. We find it here in a specific set of coordinates, the exact intersection of high motivation, value incongruence, and high red tape. This exact intersection is the primary driver of rapid burnout and deep professional regret among elite public servants. Researchers call this motivation crowding out, a state where a toxic environment permanently extinguishes the employee's initial pro-social drive. Contrast this with the peak of the graph, where high motivation and tight value congruence create motivation crowding in, amplifying positive outcomes. The evidence suggests that institutional failures stems from the systematic destruction of highly motivated employees through poor contextual design. This interactionist approach represents the future of public administration research, reflected in the steep, exponential rise in moderation studies over the last decade. The data establishes a clear management imperative. Organizations can no longer rely merely on screening for and hiring highly motivated individuals. Leadership's primary function must be to actively engineer work environments that align with complex internal motives, rather than generating friction against them. Public service motivation is a double-edged sword. It is a powerful force, but it requires precision alignment to be wielded safely. Sustaining a high-performing public sector requires shifting away from treating motivation as a static guarantee and managing it as a dynamic variable that must be actively protected and aligned.